Shut up and sit down.
Good day, real estate investors. My name is Scott Lurie. You are joining us today on The Hard Truths. Super excited today to have in studio with us Craig Haskins. Craig Haskins is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Nightberry Title, based out of Wisconsin. Today we are joined by Craig to discuss all things title. And while title might be perceived as something that is not material, today we're going to explain the nuances of title, the impact title has related to your real estate transaction, and how important understanding the intricacies of title are as it relates to you, the real estate investor. So Craig, thanks for joining us in the studio, and we are super excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. And also thank you for preparing the long list of questions so I know what you're going to ask me today, which did not happen.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Well, you don't really need a long list of questions, because I think anything we're going to discuss today is we like to do ad lib here and kind of just spitfire. And I'm very confident, based on your 1 million transactions you do a day, that you'll be able to knock this one out of the park.
I got 26 years of title and closing knowledge in my head. I'm going to have to call on different departments of the skull here to answer what you're going to ask me. So.
Well, you'll get it done for us.
Yes, sir.
Craig, if you got a minute, give us a little background. So I know Nightberry is a local title company. How many locations do you have? How many states are you operating in currently? And what are your future plans, if you can kind of just share? I know Nightberry's been growing, and so just give us a little rundown of the company.
Sure. Nightberry is 168 years old this year. It was formed in the 1800s. To give it to some perspective, about 7 years before Lincoln was the president, we were already doing title and real estate closing. So my family bought it in the 70s from a family that had owned it for about 60, 70 years. So it's a very old company. We've been doing this for a long time. We've got about 50 locations in Wisconsin, and we have about a dozen in Minnesota, a dozen in Florida, one in Michigan, and a couple down in Houston, Texas. So we provide every type of title and closing service, and pretty much in those states. On the commercial level and non-residential stuff, we can provide some of that stuff in some other states that we're not physically located in. Today, it's getting more rare for people to come to a closing room, especially with remote notarization and DocuSign and the FedExing documents, wiring funds. The old days of everyone gathering around this table for a real estate ceremony are becoming less and less every year.
Not that we want to talk much about the ceremonial closing, but was COVID basically the tripper behind the breaking of the I'm going to meet at the closing table, and then you leave there with the keys, they leave there with the check, hopefully, and was COVID the killer?
Well, it definitely pushed us over the edge. We've been working on it for about 4 or 5 years prior to COVID, and then all of a sudden the world shuts down. You can't be in close proximity with others, which is really hard to do a real estate transaction. Mostly the notary part. I have to physically watch you sign ink to paper before I can notarize it and make it official. If you can't sit in front of me to see that, it makes it really difficult. So we expedited the law in many states. I think we're up to about 41 states now where it's legal for us to be on a remote. So it's not FaceTime, but just think of it, me seeing you digitally and being able to notarize your documents as you click through the screen and apply a digital signature. So definitely COVID pushed us to where we are today, but we're only a very small amount of transactions that do that. There's still the ceremonial come in and do the real estate closing. But I think as the years go by, that becomes, I don't want to say obsolete, but in a few years, it'd be harder. We'll be remembering, Scott, remember when you used to come into my office and sign with like this thing called a pen?
Yeah, right here. I have it.
So, but right now it's still mostly traditional. COVID did, remote notarization laws did really help during COVID, but we're somewhat back to normal now.
Yeah, I sold a property remotely. I think it was in Ohio or wherever, and did a remote closing with a remote notary, and the process was relatively flawless, but certainly what took the joy out of it. I ended the Zoom call and I was like, all right, that's it. Here we go. Right. So Craig, let's talk the fundamentals of title just in the basic, really high level. So people, when someone buys a piece of real estate, most folks think they get the actual structure in the real estate, which they do. But in my mind, what they really are getting is a legal document referred to as a deed that is really their ownership, right? That is the proof that they are the owner. Can you kind of, just from a very high level right now, just kind of take to the layman. So we work with a lot of real estate investors. A lot of real estate investors are really into one thing, right? They want to make money. They want to refinance. They want to, and there's so many nuances, which we're going to talk about during this process. But just tell us, what is title in your mind, right? From a 26-year-old veteran or 26-year veteran running 85 title agencies, what is title? What is title?
So the title is a concept of ownership. Let me make it a little easier and what's not real estate. So let's think of personal property. This lovely bottle of Aqua Panna water.
Yeah.
Who owns this? Well, I could probably produce a receipt that I bought this. Who does that? But mostly it's in my possession. I've got it. It's mine. No one here would argue that this isn't mine. I'm drinking out of it. My car, okay, there's a title to my car. It's in the glove box, right? My clothes are mine. Possession, receipt. In real estate, it's different. In order to prove ownership, you have to record your document or your proof of ownership, which you mentioned is a deed. So you record your proof of ownership. Scott sells a property to me. He signs the deed, which transfers the property to me. Now, in order to make that known to the world, I take that deed to the local county courthouse, to the recorder or register of deeds office, and I say, I'm the new owner. You have to pay a tax. You have to pay some fees to the government because it's the government. And you say, record this or register this. They put it in the public records, transferring your name to my name. Then there's also a domino effect of many other things. The tax bill is now sent to me. The assessor knows how to contact me to to figure out, telling me what the new value is and all that stuff. So with real estate, with real property, different than personal property, it doesn't really, it's that owning that transfer of title via the deed and recording the deed in the local courthouse that sort of makes it that official thing that gives me the ownership now. So if I sold you this bottle of water here for $1 or this whatever it is, you would just say, well, Craig must own it, he's holding it. But if I sold you a piece of real estate, you can't just say, well, he's standing on the lawn in front of this property, he must own it, here's $1 million. You can't do that. So real estate is very complex in that that's where I think you're going to go with the title search to figure out who owns that.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So a lot of our borrowers, a lot of our customers, a lot of our real estate investors, a lot of real estate investors that are listening to this, including me and my neophyte becoming a real estate investor, went through the process of title thousands of times and never really understood what I was doing until I stopped to pause and say, why am I here paying fees to obtain an owner's policy? And then what does that owner's policy provide to me as the owner, and what or who, the underwriter or the provider of the owner's policy, me, what are they doing to verify and protect me?
Right.
And so I ask you the question, taking it from a simple transaction. You're the owner of 123 Main Street. I'm the buyer of 123 Main Street. The conveyance method starts traditionally with a purchase contract, right? So that's what would trigger some type of transaction.
Right.
And so you as the title company, get a conveyance document. Some of them are on standard forms. I'm sure some of them come on a piece of paper that say, I, John Smith, own 123 Main Street, and I'm selling it to Scott Lurie for X amount of dollars. And that can be conceived as a contract. I'm sure your preference is a standard contract, but trying to break it down to the simplest terms, we then have this contract, right, that's conveying something, and then the title company's job commences. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's fair. So the contract, I mean, we have people buying property with no contract. They say it's just a handshake deal. Now, typically it's a family member. Uncle bought grandma's property. But we like to see a contract because it tells us exactly what rights grandma is selling to the uncle, what the terms are, when it's going to happen.
So Craig, sorry to jump in there. Yeah. So real estate investor, let's focus on them, as that's who is our audience. So let's talk about some helpful points, right? So it's beneficial for them, for the conveyance document, to use the standard state forms. Is that a fair statement for you?
I mean, yes, because it's standard.
Okay.
And we know exactly where to figure out what is happening, who is selling to when, how much, all of the who, what, where, when's, why's, how's. Or a well-done contract from a lawyer. Those are real easy. They cover the same thing. The back of the napkin, a little trickier. It can be done.
Sure.
But if you're a real estate investor and you're going to buy some property, I think the first thing you want to know is the guy I'm dealing with here negotiating, does he own this?
Oh, 100%. And that's so my point. I guess what I was getting into is that the standard document that comes from the state form calls for those verifications by party, buyer selling, and sellers executing and buyer executing, that those are protected interests of both parties, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, and so the protected interest is really, so we see a lot of interesting things in our world, as I'm sure you do in your world. What we're trying to share with the audience is really highest and best practices, so that they can be efficient and be true professionals in the real estate space. We're going to talk about a bunch of nuances of the transaction, but let's just take it the high level once again. So we have a purchase contract. It calls for the purchase of 123 Main Street. Both parties have executed the state form, just for the sake of assumption. What happens then, right? So Nightberry Title receives a purchase contract. Someone's asking you to do something by giving it to you, right? What's the vanilla request, right? Break it down in the lowest common denominator. Title company receives purchase contract, wherever title company is throughout the country. We're using Nightberry as a local company, but Nightberry receives a purchase contract. What happens then? The mouses start running on the treadmill. What are they doing?
Yeah. So the title company involvement is mostly important because that contract says, seller, you better prove to the buyer that you own this. I've been dealing with ABC LLC, whatever it is, as the seller, or John Doe, or whoever it is. Prove to me that you own it. So the seller engages. In most states, the seller would pick the title company, where the real estate agent or the lender, or the attorney, or whatever. The first thing we're going to do is do our title search, so we can help set up proof that the seller is the owner.
So the title search is searching who are, not only is the current owner, right? But also what else? I mean, you search. So let's talk about the search. Then I'm trying to.
I see what you're doing.
We do a long run of search, right? So how many years back do you search? 1 year?
Well, it's. I know you have investors in many states. It varies from 40 years up.
So 40 years or longer.
Right.
So the minimum title search that Nightberry or any title company is searching is a 40-year history of ownership on that property or longer, for the purpose of conveying and providing an owner's policy to the new buyer.
That's right. So in Wisconsin, for non-residential property, I would say 60 years is the minimum. And I think 60 is pretty much an easy way we can go off for the rest of this discussion.
Okay, that's fair.
We need to verify that for 60 years, John and Jane transferred it to Keith and Linda. Linda and Keith transferred it. So we need to make sure that every single owner.
And so what is that called?
That's a search. But
what does that search yield? Is that chain of title?
Chain of title. So we're looking at that chain to make sure that there's no breaks. Person that owned, sold. Person that owned, sold. Person that owned, and we didn't miss anyone. Oftentimes there are people who pass away with ownership. Now we need to read the probate records to see which heirs got it, to make sure those heirs sold it to the next person and next person. We need to guarantee to the buyer in the form of, you mentioned it, it's the title search. You do this in the courthouse. We get our search done and we're confident that this person you're negotiating with to buy 123 Main is the owner and can sell it to you. We've guaranteed that. Now, that's just the search. Now, a buyer and a lender is going to say, but we want insurance. What if you screwed up? What if in 1972 there was something that didn't happen properly at the closing that comes back to bite us? We want insurance. That's what title insurance is. So half of our gig is searching to make sure the right person's selling. And the other half of the gig is the insurance component that says, if we made a mistake, if there's something missed in that, not only that chain of title, but I know you're going to talk about other liens and monetary things that are baggage on the property. The buyer wants to know, first and foremost, is the person I'm negotiating with to buy this on this contract for a lot of money the right person that can sell all of the rights to me? That's the key on.
And all of the rights is an interesting conversation, which we're going to equally discuss in a moment, because we're going to, a lot of what we do is LLCs and ownership interests and et cetera. So we'll have that conversation, which is what makes this so exciting and complex, right? We're talking about one thing, I hand you a water bottle, that's your personal property. We're now talking about 60 years of ownership and chain of title ownership. Some people own a property for 60 years. There's one owner. They own the property, they sold it. That happens once. Most of the time, especially in urban markets, right, we see a lot of chain of title. We see a lot of transactions on a particular tax key that is where the insurance issue comes for lenders as well as owners, right? Mm-hmm. We want to be insured that I own this property or that you own this property and can convey it to me 100% fee simple, or however you want to describe it. And so to break that down, Craig, I think that little tidbit is someone gives you a purchase contract. The purchase contract is given to the title company. The title company has two objectives. They're going to run a 60-year search at the courthouse, right? So what does that mean? Do you go to the physical courthouse? Does Knight Berry go to the physical courthouse and search the records?
Well, as the years have gone by, digitization of the public records makes it easier for us not to go into the courthouse.
Okay.
So in some major metro areas, we're sitting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yep.
We can log into the courthouse. We have special high-speed lines and special agreements with the courthouse. Since we're a title company, we're doing hundreds of these a day, that we can get into the records and view the chain of title, view all these deeds and all of that in the chain. Some counties, rural counties, we have to actually walk into the courthouse, open the big books with the calligraphy, blow off the records, look at microfilm, look at old archive files to see what has happened, so that we can guarantee your investor, yep, you're buying this apartment or this whatever it is. And it's been handled perfectly for the last 60 years, and you're about to buy everything the seller owns.
So prior to digitization, you were physically in Milwaukee County Courthouse or in any of these courthouses, physically having searchers do these searches in person.
Yeah, looking at old paper documents.
And today you're doing it basically digitally.
Most of the time in larger metro areas, we can do it. We can do it from our office. We're still reviewing the same things. We're still looking at the old handwriting. We're still looking at the old, handwritten deeds from long time ago, but we're doing it on a 37-inch monitor.
Sure, makes it a lot easier.
Old microfilm machines that are constantly broken.
Yeah, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah,
makes the process a lot easier.
And faster.
And faster.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about faster also today, because transaction is important. So we go through this process, and you issue a title policy that then calls for certain things that could be described as exceptions to a title policy or requirements to a title policy for 123 Main to be conveyed from Craig to Scott. You outline this document, right? So,
That's right.
So hopefully as a real estate investor, you have all looked at title policies, right? So there's an issuance of a title policy, right? So they pro forma.
The commitment goes first.
Okay, so we have a commitment that comes out, right? So we have a title commitment that says that I, Knight Berry, underwriting by First American or whoever, who's your top underwriter?
We write them all.
Okay, so let's just say underwriter X says, here's my commitment for title. And so what is that? What is a commitment generally? Can you describe the commitment? Because if you're a real estate investor and you're not reading the commitment, you're not helping yourself.
And you're crazy.
So taking it from a title executive who's got 26 years in the business and has 85 locations, who's seen hundreds of transactions a month close, it is bestowed upon you as a real estate investor that you are checking and reading the commitment. The commitment is not in Greek, right? Right. It's in English?
Yes.
Okay, so this is in English. This is a Word document where you should be able to be reading it. So let's talk about...
Let me walk you through what that is.
Please do.
So it's our commitment to the buyer.
Okay.
The buyer is the person who receives the insurance at the end of the deal.
Okay, so let's just stop for 1 second just to help me out. So most of our real estate investors are out there bird dogging, driving for dollars, buying contracts, doing stuff. They're the buyer, right? We're the lender. They're the buyer. So as the buyer, this is a commitment to you, the buyer.
That's right.
So it's critically important that you, the buyer, know what you're buying.
Even though the seller hires us and pays our fee, it's the policy for the buyer. So our commitment is we're committing to you that if you follow the steps outlined in this commitment, at the end of the transaction, you're sitting pretty. You're owning 100% of the real estate. No one's going to threaten your ownership from that 1972 probate of grandma's estate.
Sure.
So the commitment is very easy. There's a few schedules. Schedules are just a cute word for pages, right? The front page says, you're the buyer. Here's who legally owns it. Here's what you're buying in the form of a legal description. I know we deal in addresses, but the legal description of the property, which physically describes the boundaries of the property that you're buying. And then it'll have the lender's name and it'll tell you how much the purchase is for. So we're committing, you, the buyer, have insurance for $1 million if you buy the property from this seller. It better be the guy you've been negotiating
Right,
with.
well, so I was just going to say, so the first thing you could do as the buyer is when you get the commitment, look at the first thing. Buyer is, let's just say it's John Smith, and you've been dealing with Fred Stone. You're like, well, who the hell's Fred Stone to the contract with John Smith, right?
That's right.
That's an important piece of it.
Schedule A is just information. Here's the buyer. Here's the lender, here's the amount of the transaction, and then here's what you're buying, the description. And then here is the seller. That's what we call vesting. Here's whose title is vested in this seller. Could be an LLC, could be a partnership, could be a corporation, could be an individual, could be married people.
Could be a trust.
Could be dead people.
Could be dead people, sure.
Could be bankrupt people. So that tells you a lot just looking at the seller. Now the second page says, if you want to become the buyer at the real estate closing for that amount and want us to give $1 million of our own money if we screw up, you have to do a few things. So this is the second page, Schedule B, the requirements. And the requirements say do these things and then you have title insurance and you will have a successful closing. The first thing is get a deed from, I can't remember, Fred Stone, whoever the seller was.
The seller.
Get a deed, a deed that, what kind of deed? There's a bunch of different deeds. It'll be outlined in your standard contract that Scott was praising you or encouraging you to use, not just a napkin. It'll tell us the type of deed. So
just to go back to that, the purchase contract, if you do a standard purchase contract, let's just say here, would generally call for a warranty deed.
Warranty deed.
Which we're going to talk about. But so let's just say, so the contract describes the deed that is going to be part of this conveyance underneath Schedule B.
Yep.
So carry on.
Okay. So Schedule B says requirements, get a deed from seller to buyer. You're in great shape.
And that deed is the conveyance, right? So that deed, that's the aha moment of the conveyance.
Yeah.
The rest of it also is what gives you all of the requirements need to be checked off, right?
Right. But that deed is your receipt.
Right.
I mean, that is just like in the old Western movies. I've got my deed. I'm going to roll it up and hide it under the bed. We don't do that anymore. Or put it in the safe, and Dad's going to gamble away the farm with the deed in the middle of the poker table. That's not what we do. It goes to the courthouse. The second after it closes, we run it to the courthouse and say, we have a new buyer. So that deed is gold. The other thing it would say is, in order to pay for this deed, you probably need money. And you probably are getting a loan from Scott. And there needs to be a mortgage too. So you're going to get a deed from the seller. You're going to sign a mortgage. And we've got these documents here. We're going to record them in the courthouse, putting you in title and putting Scott with a mortgage on your title. Okay. And there might be some other things in there, like if you're buying it from an LLC. So the guy might say, yeah, ABC LLC is in title. And I'm going to say, well, who are you? Well, I'm Fred Stone. Well, who's that?
Yeah. Who's Fred Stone?
Who's Fred Stone? Well, I'm the managing member of this LLC. Oh, yeah? Prove it. Make sure the title company proves, with the seller that Fred Stone is the guy authorized to sign the deed on behalf of the LLC. Otherwise, you're getting a worthless deed and you're not going to get title insurance, and you're going to be walking into a new property and someone's going to say, we don't know who Fred Stone is.
Yeah, and
sucker.
So that's I'm gonna pause you for just 2 seconds because this is so critical and we're talking about schedule. But the moment that I want our investors to also pick up on is we have a lot of partnerships. We have a lot of investors that work under LLC agreements, and they have multiple members in their LLC. Creating an operating agreement that clearly calls for who can convey, who can sign on behalf of company, clearly outlined in your operating agreement is gold for efficiency as you work through multiple transactions to a title company like yours that says who can sign. John Smith can sign. It says it very clear in there.
Right.
And so I think that's a very important note, which we can always discuss as we move on from the exit side.
But I mean, if you do a podcast, maybe you have already with a lawyer, setting up an operating agreement properly to protect your rights
For sure.
is incredibly important. I can't tell you how many times 6 guys from college go in, they all throw in 50 grand, they're going to buy a duplex or whatever they're going to buy. One of them lives in town, and he's the managing person. He's running the affairs. He's maintaining it. He's the one handling everything. The operating agreement gives this one guy, everyone else lives in Florida or North Carolina, wherever.
Right.
But they give this one guy the power to do anything. And he comes in and sells, and then we get a call from the other 5 saying, what happened? What's going
Where's
on?
my money?
Your operating agreement gave this guy. No, he was just supposed to be like fixing the roof and collecting rents. That's not what the operating agreement says.
Right.
So you got to make sure, like if you're a passive investor and you want to be able to hold up a sale, hold up a refi, you need to make sure the operating agreement spells out the terms. So that's a aha moment too, because we get calls all the time. Or one guy comes to closing, I go, where are your 5 partners? Well, they're all over the country. Well, they need to be here. No, I'm the guy in charge. No, you're the guy in charge for maintenance,
right,
for roof leaks and rent collection. This says the power of all 6 of you need to be here to sell something. Oh, I had no idea. So you got to and that's set up way before you buy a property. So
and that's a great point. And we'll talk about that later as well. But talking about how to set up an operating agreement properly, it's worth the investment. Would you agree with the statement? It's worth the investment. The couple $100 or the few hours of legal team is worth the investment.
Yeah, 6 bros in college throw some money in and they don't have a good operating agreement. Boy, you're really setting yourself up for a surprise. Partnerships aren't really typically fun because usually partners don't agree on everything, especially when it has to do with the disposition of the real estate or the borrowing. So having that set up, whether there's a majority or whatever it is, having that set up properly right away can really save you from a surprise when you found out that your investment was sold.
Right.
And
the money's gone.
And then you get a check in the mail and you're like, what's this? And it's like, oh, that was your share. We sold the apartment.
Yeah.
Wow, when?
Yeah.
So
our 6 friends are no longer friends anymore.
Right. So that's the sale from Fred Stone to your guy is like, we get the deed from the seller, we get the mortgage, and then there are other things like prove who's allowed to come to closing.
But let's also talk. So let's get into the Schedule B a little bit further. Right. So you talk about these requirements, right? So having seen probably thousands of requirements myself, and you've probably seen millions of requirements. Let's talk about what's typical, right? What are people seeing in the conveyance of an urban property that you will also see on requirements that are there?
I think you're meaning exceptions.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Exceptions, correct.
That's the next page.
Yes.
The first page of Schedule B, because we're title insurance and we don't want anyone to figure out what we're up to.
Yes.
Is the requirements are called Schedule B, Section 1.
Right.
The exceptions are Schedule B, Section 2.
Correct.
Why couldn't we have there's 26 letters, but we only decided to use 2.
No, that's okay.
So, all right.
B2 is what I was referring to. So thank you. So we got the first piece and the conveyance piece. Now, what's this exception?
All right, so you can think of these as clouds on title. When you brightly earlier when I said you get all the rights to the property. By the way, you can't buy all the rights to the property. There's always one thing that has rights on your property whether you want them or not. Government. Government can take your property, build a highway right through it. They pay you for it, but they can condemn, they can take over from eminent domain, they can do several things. So the government always has power. So let's just get that out of the way.
Okay.
Forget the government.
Right.
I don't know if anyone's ever said that on your podcast.
No.
I'm going to say forget the government.
We'll make that a quote for you.
Thank you. So your investors buying this property, and there are a lot of people that have rights to the property. We call them clouds on title, right? So there are the government. Forget the government. Who else has the rights on your property? Well, does your property have water, sewer, electrical, utilities, cable, gas? Yes. Those people have rights to come onto your property where buried electrical lines, overhead electrical lines, water and sewer. So there's all the utilities that have the rights.
What are those called? Isn't there a name for that?
Easements?
So easements.
Sure.
So an easement is a recorded document. Typically from a utility provider that provides. So when we do development, we create easements with the utility company, the energy company to put their equipment on our property,
right.
and then there's the easement generally describes who maintains, how you can dig, blah blah blah, etc. Yeah. So understanding easements.
So an easement is basically someone else has permission to use your property in some way. Another way you can think of an easement is, let's say people walk across your backyard to get to school. Maybe there's a high school behind you and there's a trail that goes through the back corner of your property. It's been there forever. Maybe that's an easement for the neighborhood kids to walk across your property. Maybe you share a driveway. The driveway goes between properties and splits, but the part that's on the straddling the property line, some's on your line, some's on the other. there's an easement for the neighbor to drive over portions of yours. There's an easement for you to drive over portions of theirs until you drive onto your. So those are easements. Those are rights others have in your property.
So a drive that's shared by 3 homes on a private drive, that private drive could be an easement for 3 different homes.
Sure.
And then when you get to your property line or your other property line that's just yours, that easement would be terminated or no longer exist?
Yeah, so the easement is typically the property that you're allowing someone else to use. So after you get on your own property line, your neighbor can't just keep driving into your land.
Okay.
I mean, he's got to turn into his own property.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's an easement. So easements are right. So when you look at Schedule B, Section 2, and you're showing a list of easements, you want to make sure there isn't anything that's surprising.
Sure.
So obviously utilities, if there's a shared driveway or something, maybe a well agreement, maybe you share a well and it's on your property, but the neighbors can come, run electrical and get the pipes into. Anyways, there's a lot of those. So those are easements. Those are easy ones. Those typically run with the land for a period of years. If it's on the title, you need to know that someone else has rights to the property. But there's covenants and restrictions. So let's say if it's a residential type neighborhood, multifamily or whatever, maybe it says you can't park a work van in your front yard. You can't paint the house Packard green and gold. You can't hang laundry in your front yard. There's a list of subdivision or neighborhood restrictions of what you can and can't do. You can't have more. You can't Airbnb it. You can't, all of the things of what you can't do with the property. So if you're expecting to park boats or work vans for your tenants in your front property, you want to know that ahead of time by looking at those restrictions to see that you can't do that. It might affect your desire to want that property.
Yeah, or the marketability to the next guy, right? If you're going to go sell it, if it becomes less valuable as a result of a covenant that would be protected.
Right. So those are the things that you'll see that aren't monetary. But then you see the other stuff. The rest of the exceptions are things that are seller baggage or clouds on title. Seller hasn't paid real estate taxes. Seller hasn't paid water bill. Seller has 10 mortgages, 4 judgments, a child support lien, and a bankruptcy. All that monetary stuff is yours, buyer, if you don't get them taken care of with the title company at the closing. So
explain that. So let's talk through this, because this is one of the things. The covenants generally for what we deal with are generally available. The Schedule 1, B1 are generally pretty
easy to do.
Customary, right? I would say they're customary. What we run into from the real estate investment side is these challenges, right? I mean, I just looked at a title that had, I think, 13 pages of judgments from the borrower.
I'm familiar with that file.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so I look at this and I'm like, oh my God. So then you get into the scenario, this guy wanted a refinance. And I said to myself, do I want to lend this guy money?
Yeah.
The answer is probably not, but let's move on. So borrowers or buyers that are taking a property subject to a warranty deed, subject to title insurance and an owner's policy, the requirement of the seller is that all of those judgments, payoffs, monetary are satisfied, right?
Right. Back to your standard contract, it will say something in there that the seller can convey the title to the buyer free and clear of all monetary or certain encumbrances that are listed on the title commitment. And then the title commitment will list out judgments, all the monetary things. So the buyer really should, when they get the title work, check Schedule A, look at Schedule B, go to Schedule B2, which has, look for dollar signs. Oh my gosh, the seller owes a lot of money to a lot of people. Communicate with your real estate agent, your lawyer, but the title company and say, I want to make sure that all of these items are going to be gone. If I give you my money and buy this thing, am I stuck with any of this baggage from the seller? And then the answer should be no. And you don't really
The answer is absolutely no, because what happens, right?
Well, you get a knock on your door. Use the easy example.
Right.
You move into your new house, you get a knock on your door from a creditor saying, hey, the seller that sold you this owed me $15,000. Now, remember, the lien that was created by the judgments and things like that stick to the real estate. So if the seller moves, the real estate still has that lien stuck on it. And you bought it subject to, meaning you bought it and you're stuck with it now. Now it's your problem if the title insurance or the title company didn't take care of it.
So go to the real life scenario where we're real estate investors and we see this happen way more often than it probably should. So there's a mechanism where I can give you, for some consideration outside of a traditional real estate transaction, a quitclaim deed, where you then become owner of the property upon recording, and you not only own the property, but all of the monetary judgments on that property.
So, all right. Let me just summarize, or not summarize. Let me just set this part straight. If you were, forget title insurance, forget I exist.
Yep.
You dealing with Fred, the seller, and Fred says, I will sell you this property, and you say, I want a warranty deed because I'm a smart investor. A warranty deed says Fred is guaranteeing you that he's transferring it and all that stuff's taken care of. Okay, now think about this. You don't have title insurance. You just did a side deal with this guy. And now,
well, just to clarify, okay, good. I know.
Now there's a mess. Your recourse is to track down Fred. Hope he has money to take care of that stuff.
Because he's provided you with that warranty.
Right, he's got a warranty. Now, if you have title insurance in that scenario, you don't have to chase down Fred. You just call your title company and say, hey, there's this thing, somebody's knocking on my door, pay it, and we pay it. And then maybe we chase down Fred. But
Sure.
You don't have to deal with it. You don't have to chase down sellers. Where are they? They might have died. They might have moved. They might not have any money. Why deal with that? That's what the title component is for. Now, back up again. Side deal you have with Fred. Fred goes, I'll sell you this. I'm going to give you a great deal. But I can't give a warranty deed. I don't really feel comfortable with that. I'm going to give you a quit claim deed.
QCD, short term, but a quit claim deed.
Quit claim deed. That's just basically the seller, Fred, saying, I'm selling you, I'm conveying whatever I own with no warranties.
And when he says whatever he owns,
he might own 100% of the title, but he's saying whatever baggage is out there is you.
So just think about this real estate investor and what Craig is, I think, saying it's very important to you. He is conveying to you everything he owns on that property. That doesn't just mean the land and the structure. That also means the judgments that are owed on the property.
Yeah. So,
back taxes, water bill, medical claim, judgment for...
So typically when we see a quit claim deed request from a seller, well, most of your deals are going to have title insurance,
Sure.
not all of them.
Correct.
So if you did your due diligence right, you got your title policy buyers, and the seller is insisting on signing a quit claim deed, sometimes that's because the seller knows there's something out there that's ugly, and the seller's saying, look, I don't want to warrant this title to anyone. Get your own insurance from Nightberry. The title company will give you the insurance. You're not getting anything from me. That tells me,
yeah, I got a problem coming.
What's he hiding? So sometimes title companies won't even accept a quit claim deed. So if you know we won't accept a quit claim deed in a transaction like that, on your side deal, you probably might not want to do that. There could be some reason why. Let's say Fred Stone's mom died and left him the property. He's never even been to the property. He's just selling it. He might say, I don't want to warrant anything. I've never lived here. I've never even been here. Why would I give you a warranty, personal warranty? In that case, I'm going to give a quit claim deed saying, look, I'm transferring all of Mom's estate. I have no idea what it is. You're on your own. Figure it out with the title company. Well, that makes sense.
Sure, there's some logic to that.
Real estate guy who's, owned it for a while, or a homeowner owning it for a while, or an apartment or whatever it is, selling it to you, and they're saying, I don't want to sign a warranty deed. That's a red flag.
Yeah, so let's ask a question, because we see this every once in a while related to quit claim deeds. So John Smith provides a quit claim deed to me. Mm-hmm. It's recorded. I'm now the owner.
You're the owner, subject to whatever junk was out there.
Right, subject to that other junk. Yeah. So what happens in the scenario where I quit claim deed it to someone else?
Yeah, now remember, it sticks with the real estate.
Right.
You can deed it to a million different people. It just keeps...
So that judgment, all of that nonsense, monetary negative, right? Because it's not positive. No one's saying you win $1 million by owning the property.
Right.
You owe money. Goes to what happens?
It stays on the property. So you bought it from John Smith, and there's junk on it.
Yep.
That doesn't attach to you personally.
Okay,
Scott.
so you see that, guys. So it does. It's a real estate driven. So all it does is impede your title,
right,
or your marketability of title.
So a lien. It's stuck to the real estate.
Okay.
And if you are good and slippery enough to sell it to the next guy comes in, he's like, oh, I've got it on the real estate. Now he's the owner. He's got to deal with it. He might transfer it to someone else, but it's the owner of the real estate that has to deal with it. It could be judgments, could be child support liens, could be back tax, could be anything.
Sure. So that's I've got two topics that are relatively fascinating to the real estate investor. So most of the parties, and one of the requirements out of our lending institution is that we only lend to limited liability companies or the like, right? A corporation,
partnership,
whatever, however you describe it. So some investors say, well, why, right? Like, and they want to also understand the benefits, or what are the protections underneath a limited liability company versus not. And I've got three partners, right? Me, John, and Paul. And so if we wanted to take title to it in each of our individual names, you would run title on each individual one of us. Is that correct? To determine what liens are out in the world on owners?
Yeah. So it's a great segue. When we talked about a search earlier, we only talked about looking for deeds.
Correct.
So we are searching just the land. But
Great.
we also have to search the individuals over that 60 years to make sure they didn't have any individual baggage. You, John, and Paul might have a judgment. You got in a car wreck, you banged up someone's car, the insurance company sues you for 10 grand, you have a personal judgment against you. Now your personal judgment is now on the real estate too. Because if you own real estate and you're sued for a money judgment, it attaches to all the real estate you own in that county. So all that 60-year, when we talked about land earlier, we also have to look at all of the owners to see if there's any individual owners.
But
Right.
it stuck to the individual. So you're running only individual queries. So if it's John Smith, 123 Limited Liability Company, you're not running the owners of the limited liability company. You're only running the individual owners of that property for individual judgments that have an individual baggage.
Correct. So when we do the search, if the title is held in ABC LLC, we're looking for that entity's lawsuits, judgments, liens, things like that.
So that
not the individual partners inside of it, unless those individual partners inside of it left the LLC and held it privately or personally in their own name, then we would search their own name. But we're only searching the owners that were on the deed.
So talking best practices to our investors, right? So an investor has a partnership, right? There's three interns that want to go build buy a property, a duplex. The recommendation is, guys, create an LLC, get an operating agreement that protects each of them in that operating agreement so they're all comfortable, and then take title to that property, or investor take title to that property as an LLC.
Yeah, because if John, Paul, and Scott own it as their three names, and you guys are clean as a whistle, great borrowers, great buyers, perfect human beings, and then one of you get a judgment, you've now leaned up the real estate for all of you.
Right. And so what
putting it in an LLC kind of shields that, because it's not the LLC that got in trouble, it's the individual members. So typically on a title search, we wouldn't search deeper to the members inside the LLC.
Yeah, and so that's so we see this a lot. So real estate investors, even if you're an individual, let's say you're just John. And John, we recommend John buy it in an LLC, because if John's personal life, right, maybe he gets into that car accident. Yeah. Maybe he, something happens, gets divorced. Maybe there's some child support. Maybe there's something coming that's due underneath the individual name. Under the limited liability company laws, you're protected, right? You're not searching that owner.
Right.
And that's critical to keeping. And I look at it only from the real estate investor, because our real estate investors, or myself as a real estate investor, or anybody investing in real estate, we make money or we earn income by either taking title to a property and then encumbering it with a mortgage to satisfy whatever obligations monetarily we have, or when we sell it, we want to sell it free and clear of any of those judgments that we would have to maybe pay as an individual. You don't have to pay on the LLC, and you could protect yourself.
Yeah, you sound like a title expert. I want to mention one other things about the individuals of the LLC.
Yes, please.
There's a division of the government called FinCEN, F-I-N-C-E-N. It's like financial crimes, okay? So there are some jurisdictions in the United States, only a few, Chicago, LA, New York, Vegas, Miami, like really high-end, really sought-after, expensive real estate, that if you buy in an LLC, the title company has to look at all the individual owners of that LLC and report it to the government. It's for drug embezzlement, it's for money laundering, it's for terroristic crime. So I know this is a podcast that people watch all over the place. So in some jurisdictions, we are going to bother you for the individual names, and we're going to run a check with the government on those names to make sure that the government is aware of that scenario.
But other than those markets, you're not doing it. So if you're buying it in in wherever one of the markets that do not require that requirement, you do not go and proactively seek that. You say, give me your operating agreement, and we'll go off of that to see who can do what.
Right. In Brainerd, Minnesota, we're not going to ask you for that. But in Miami Beach, you're buying a $10 million condo with cash. We're going to report you to the feds.
Right.
And they're going to tell us whether or not that's
whether or not they're coming knocking.
Yeah, whether or not they think you're a terrorist or a drug runner or money launderer or something like that. But I just thought I'd mention that because someone's going to say, well, I just did a transaction and they bothered me for the individual members. Maybe that was in one of those. I don't know. There's a dozen or two markets in the country that have that. Yeah.
So I'm going to shift a little bit, and then we're going to go back to the final process when you're going to issue the owner's policy. But I want to talk a couple nuances of real estate investing or investing 101 that we're seeing pretty prevalent in our market.
Okay.
So we see a lot of people buying property via land contract. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing after that land contract is then they'll come to us after the land contract matures or soon to mature. And they'll say, can you provide us with some type of financing? And then after that, they seek their final home or whatever their end outcome might be. And so let's talk land contract. I want to buy a property from you. I don't have the money today. We agree that I'm going to buy it from you subject to a land contract.
Yeah. It's sort of like layaway, right?
So it's like layaway, but
installment.
But so me, right? So me, the buyer, via land contract, right? So I want to come up with nothing down. I've been renting this house from you for 5 years. I pay you $1,200 a month. I want to own it now, but I want to own it on a land contract in my LLC. Mm-hmm. How important is title insurance at that point? Because if you're so we see this, right? The reason I bring this up is if seller's selling and seller's got 50 judgments and owes $20 million to the bank, and you're buying it from him for $100,000, and you're going to give him that $100,000 over a 4-year term.
And then you get to the 4th year, and then the bank wipes your land contract out and all the money you've given.
So they wipe it out via foreclosure, or you get judgments that are coming after you to foreclose out. You're screwed. Right. I mean, there's no solution for you.
So as a land contract buyer, you got to sort of think of yourself too as the bank. Like, I want to make sure that my land contract, my rights under this installment contract.
So if you're a land contract buyer, think of your position as the bank.
Sort of like, all right, well, here, let's say this. Same thing we talked about earlier. If I'm buying this property, okay, you're buying it, and some states are called agreement for a deed. So it's just basically like, I'm going to make installments for 4 years, and at the end of this 4-year period, it's going to balloon. I've got to come up with the balance, or maybe I've paid you off over those 4 years, but you don't get your official deed until the end. But you're taking title, you're the owner, subject to the seller's stuff. So if the seller has a ton of judgments or monetary items, and you enter into a land contract, all those, the judgments, the mortgages, all that stuff is ahead of your rights. So if the seller ever defaults on that judgment or doesn't pay it back or doesn't pay the mortgage back, those folks can wipe you and your land contract right out. So the title search is
but
very
thinking
important.
about that though, so give us your tips, Craig, because we see people that do this all the time. I own this on land contract.
Yeah.
Well, we order a title policy, a lender policy through Nightberry. We say, hey, Nightberry, issue us a title policy. This guy owns it via land contract, and we go to the land contract, and it's not recorded.
Yeah.
And there's no reference of a land contract, and there's no reference of this agreement, but they have the land contract. It's executed. It's an executable document. And I'm like, well, what about all this nonsense?
Mm-hmm. So
help our real estate investors that buy via land contract. Mm-hmm. Give us 2 tips. Give us practical.
When you do a land contract, tip number 1 is do a title search. Call your favorite title company. You don't need to. I mean, you could order title insurance for your land contract. That's common. Usually, if a lawyer's involved, they're going to insist it, which is tip number 1.
Right.
If a lawyer's going to insist on it, that means it's great protection for you. But even if you don't do that and you do some rudimentary search of the records to see what seller junk is on there, you're going to get a land contract. You're going to need to run that to the courthouse and record it as if you would a deed, because that tells the world that you're the owner now, subject to the rights of the seller, but you're the owner. And then for the next 4 years, anything that happens to the seller, gets in a car wreck, has a judgment, it doesn't go onto the title anymore because you're the owner now.
So real estate investor, just to think about what he just said, because this is so critical. The moment your land contract or agreement for deed is recorded,
that kind of cuts off any new stuff that seller can junk your title.
so that creates your protective rights. So if you wait 4 years to record this document, current owner who it might be in financial distress, maybe has a problem, who knows, goes and gets into a car accident and title is conveyed. Title judgment is attached to the property. Guess who else gets to have that title or that judgment? You do, land contract owner.
And it's just more people that have rights to the property that you thought for the last 4 years you've been paying a lot for, thinking that at the end of this rainbow you're going to own the title. Well, there's been a lot of baggage added that you didn't know about. So get a search done, figure out ahead of time that there are these 3 things. The seller can take care of taxes, water bills, judgments. Get them off. Get your deed your land contract recorded. Pay your payments
recorded land contract upon
execution. Same as recording a deed.
Right away, guys.
Right,
so record your contract. So Craig, let me ask you a question. How much does a land contract owner's policy cost? I'm the seller. I don't want. Well, give me an idea. How much are you saying to protect your rights and have your ownership recorded immediately? Ballpark, $1,000?
Well, it depends on the.
That's just under a couple grand.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So for a couple,
unless you're buying $1 million property.
But let's just say for under a couple grand, you're going to make the investment in your owner's policy. You're going to get the owner's policy. You're going to own the owner's policy, and you have great assurance you can sleep at night when you make your payments every month that you're the owner and no one else's judgments could attach to your property.
And you can always, at the end of the 4 years, when Scott gives you the loan, and then you pay off the seller's balance, and the seller's gone, and now you're the whole fee owner. You can easily have that policy you paid for 4 years ago very cheaply updated, so it's protected you the whole way. So I would say up front, get a title insurance commitment and policy saying here's the junk on the seller. Let the title company take care of that junk. You become the land contract holder or owner. You pay those installments to the seller over the period of 4 years. You go to Scott. Scott gives you the money to buy out the rest of the property. Now you own it free and clear, and your policy can be updated. That's the easy way to do it.
So let's just talk about this because we see this also a lot. So a guy buys something on land contract. He does it. He runs title by himself, and there's a couple judgments, a $500 judgment, a $1,000 judgment, and there's a mortgage to Wells Fargo for $50,000.
Yeah. So
and then the guy still signs the agreement, and now what happens, right?
So I would probably venture to guess that Wells Fargo or whoever the seller's lender is doesn't allow the seller to sell you the property or land contract without them being paid off. So almost always the seller is behind the scenes of the bank saying, hey, I'll sell you this property. Now, if you're crazy enough to take it, maybe it's a friend or a relative that you trust. If you do that and the seller stops paying that Wells mortgage, Wells is going to wipe you out. Even if it's the
so when you say wipe them out, what Craig means is they're going to issue a foreclosure notice, foreclosure action because the guy hasn't paid. They're going to take your land contract and foreclose your land contract, and you're going to be left with.
And you're going to say, I've paid $25,000 over 4 years for this, and Wells is going to say, well, the seller with that $25,000 should have been paying us,
right?
Hasn't been, so we own it now. Bye-bye. Sorry about your loss. You can go sue the seller.
And you can go sue the seller, but sorry about your loss. The seller at this point is defunct already, so great. So let's talk about another pretty prevalent risk profile in real estate investing, which is called subject to. And subject to, for those of you who don't fully understand it, is real estate investor is buying a property from anybody, and it is subject to the existing exceptions on title, essentially is what's going on. Traditionally, and most prominently what you see is subject to is happening is traditional to a subject to for financing, right? An existing mortgage. This happens a lot in very expensive markets, Arizona, California, Florida, New York. You see a lot of subject tos where ABC investor, I'm buying your property. You've got a $500,000 mortgage on it. It's worth $1 million, and I give you $100,000 for your property because you're in distress for whatever reason, or I give you nothing, right? There's some great guys out there that are just buying subject to with no money, but they're subject to the debt, and then they start servicing this debt, right? And so this is a scary proposition for a person like Craig Haskins from Nightberry, saying you're buying this subject to exceptions on title, and most of the time they're not doing it, but they are recording a deed.
Right.
So subject to, if we talk a little bit about subject to, the known risks that are out there, the opportunity is tremendously high and the risk is low, right? Because the risk is subject to this financing. The chance that Wells Fargo ever is going to know that I bought the property from you, there's no mechanism for that at this point. So what are your thoughts about that? And how, the reason I ask for thoughts is really, how can a real estate investor protect themselves if their method is subject to financing? Do they run title? Do they want to know that there's no list pendants filed, that there's no pending judgments, that there's no other stuff on title that would impact them?
I suppose if you bought $1 million property for $100,000 in cash, but you're responsible for this $500,000.
Yeah, you
mortgage.
pay it, and they're paying it every month.
Right.
I mean, that's the truth. So
you can still buy a title insurance policy to make sure that all the seller stuff is taken care of and the requirements are met, and you're becoming the real owner of the property, subject to us saying, hey, if Wells comes back to bite you, this has nothing to do with us.
So you would issue a policy subject to this exception, and the exception would stay on the title policy. Yeah. It wouldn't clear title.
I mean, you could do that. When you say Wells probably won't find out, I mean, if they do, most lenders, when they enter a loan with Bob or Fred Stone, there's a due on sale clause that says, look, if you're not the owner anymore, you need to pay us off. Correct. So Fred's behind the scenes sneakily sells it, and then the new buyer just keeps paying the mortgage or paying the debt for the next 22 years or something. I suppose Wells will probably find out about that at some point when they're searching the real estate taxes every year to make sure, and they see there's a new owner that's not their borrower. But look, I'm not a real estate investor. From a title perspective, we would issue our policy saying you are now the owner. You've got an easement. You can't hang your laundry in the front yard, and you've got this Wells from the previous owner is still out there. You still have to deal with it. It has nothing to do. We're not covering you. We're not saying Wells isn't going to find out and come get you. And the buyer might say, I don't care. I've got $1 million property. I've paid $100,000. I've got $500 in this mortgage to deal with. I still have a lot of money in there.
Yeah, or they're renting it and covering the spread. I mean, it's subject to such a widespread investment thesis, yet very concerning to me from time to time. So, Craig, I'm going to bring us all the way back to now. We're at the closing table, or we're about to go to a closing, right? Because we got through, I think, a lot of interesting points on title, but now what are we really getting, right? So we have B2, which lists a lot of monetary judgments, payoffs, etc. So what happens at that point, right? So buyer goes here. Now we get to B2. We've got a mortgage. We've got these 5 judgments from the city of Milwaukee, from Department of Neighborhood Services, and from who else knows, small claims court, whatever. We've got all this stuff. What
do you do?
What happens?
Let me tell you what I would do.
Well, we're at Nightberry. You're at Nightberry.
But this is me if I'm a real estate buyer.
Let's hear it.
I bought a bunch of homes. So this is what you all should do. And this is from a title person who sees this every day. This is what the smart folks do when they come to closing. Have the most current version of the title commitment with you. And with the closer, the Nightberry closer, or whoever you're dealing with, whether you're in our state or not, you sit down and you say, okay, before, you remember, the buyer brought money in the form of their own cash, earnest money, down payment, cash to closing, and the lender brought some money. So there's a big pot of money sitting in the title company's account, and the deed from the seller, all the docs are done. But you don't want to what's called break escrow, or you don't want to say, let's get this deal done. Don't touch that money yet. Closer, me and you. Let's go through this. All right, Schedule A. I'm the buyer on this deed, right? Okay, check mark. You check that off too. All right, this seller, is that who showed up today? Are you happy with the seller? Yeah, all right, check that off too. Is this the purchase price? Yep, check that off. Schedule B1, the requirements. You told me, title company, I'm the buyer, that these things had to happen on or before closing. Have these all happened? Do you have the deed, the mortgage, the operating agreement? Are you happy that everything, yes? Cross those all out. Say we've done them all. Sign the bottom. Okay, next page. Here's the monetary exceptions. This easement, that's fine. I need utilities. If you want us to remove the easement, we'll have the power company take the power lines down. Now you've got a useless property. So no, I'm okay with those. But what about these real estate taxes? You're paying them? Okay, cross that off.
And when you say they're crossing them off, the mechanism is you're looking at a closing statement though, and you're saying payment 2020 real estate taxes, which is an exception on the title. It's saying $4,284. You should see on the closing statement a payment to the municipality for $4,284.
But oftentimes the person that's doing the closing statement and the calculations is not the same as the title company.
Correct.
Especially in some states. So what you should do is just say, look, if you're a happy closer, you're a Nightberry closer. That's a Nightberry commitment. Nightberry said there's real estate taxes. You're also nightmare. Cancel it off.
Right. So you're asking the title.
Take a pen,
cross through it,
sign your initials,
and initial it, and they're verifying it's being paid.
Every single thing. Those judgments. Remember that 14 pages of judgments? You paid them all. Cross them off.
Right.
Sign
So you're asking them to cross off.
You're handing me an ugly piece of paper, but you're giving me something that I can leave the closing saying, the title company's on the hook. They've done all these things. The closer did all these things that the insurance policy, the commitment required them to, and now I'm feeling great. Now, in some title companies that are sophisticated enough, we can do that ahead of time.
Sure.
And when you mentioned earlier a pro forma, which just means like after the closing in a few weeks, what will my policy look like if I get it in the mail?
So like a pro forma on a financial statement, what will my real estate look like in a couple months when I get my real estate and I own it? That's a pro forma.
Right.
We would ask you for the pro forma of what my owner policy is going to look like down the road.
But there's nothing wrong with the version I was saying. We call it a marked up.
Yeah, marked up title, sure.
So just have the closer cross out everything being paid. So when you leave, you know that title company is taking that deed, that mortgage, all these documents, and all those checks to pay off those judgments and the mortgage and the recording. And you're doing all that, right? Tell me you're doing it all. So when I leave, I know there's no one going to knock on my door.
Right. So real estate investors.
You have to do.
Listen, guys.
That's the only thing you learned today. That's number one.
So that's the only thing you've learned today is that number one thing from a guy who's got 26 years of experience in title is to mark up the title to make sure that everything that the title company says they're going to do is being done, and they're executing by signature and crossing off, and you are receiving what is going to be called the marked up title.
Mm-hmm. And if you're closing at the bank and there's no title company with you, think about that ahead of time. When you're booking the closing, you're going to be at the bank on Monday at 10 o'clock. Will there be a representative from the title company? No. Okay, will you be available? Can we fax or email the docs so you can mark it up, or can someone just come to the closing with me?
Sure. And you can request a closer, and you can also request an advanced marked up title.
Sure.
And all of that's just good practice, guys. So real estate investors, buying title, I see it happen all the time. Our investors leave title, leave closings within 5 minutes. And I'm like, how did you do all of that? And they're like, it just signed, right? I signed your mortgage documents. Did you look at what you're buying? Mm-hmm. Did you check the title? We check every title policy that comes through us every time, right? That's just part of our process of our underwriting. But you as a real estate investor who's taking title to the property need to do the exact same thing, because we do get calls and you do get claims and people miss stuff. It happens. It's part of the business.
I get calls all the time from real estate investors to say, hey, look, I've been here and now I got this letter from the state looking for a tax lien that wasn't paid from the seller. What's the deal? Well, did you get a title search done? Did you make the title company pay that at the closing table? Well, I didn't know about it. Well, maybe the title company missed it. We're humans. Right. We miss it. We'll pay it.
Things happen. So, a cheap policy is a title policy.
Yeah, I mean, they're very inexpensive. You're sitting in Wisconsin where I am right now. It's the cheapest in the Midwest. They vary from state to state, depending on how risky the title market is in each state. But yeah, it's very affordable, and it lasts for as long as you or your heirs or your partnership owns the title.
Wow,
it's a
amazing.
One-time premium.
One-time premium.
And remember, you're the buyer. The standard contract says seller's paying for it typically. So as a buyer, get it.
Right, as a buyer, get it. The seller pays for it. You're the benefactor of it, and you should get it. Okay, so you go through that process, you get to the closing statement, you're now ready to break escrow, as you called it, but you feel good. You've done everything you said you're going to do. You're done. What goes on now?
The second you walk out the door, our closers are going to run your deed mortgage over to the scanner and electronically record those in the public records.
Immediately, because you do it immediately.
Our rule, well, because you remember, the longer you wait, the more chance the seller could screw something up on your title.
Right.
So if we're sitting on it for a week, no way.
Right.
Our internal rule is if it closes and you can record that day, some courthouses stop recording at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if it's an afternoon closing, we're going to record first thing in the morning. We can stage it that day, so when the courthouse opens in the morning, it zips right in. So we get the documents. Sometimes we have to run them to the courthouse in rural counties. We record. Then we have all this money, your lender's money, your earnest money. We have to figure out who's getting it. Maybe there's a real estate commission, there's a title fee, there's fees and taxes to the state. The seller's mortgage, we're going to wire that payment out. The seller's judgments, we're going to pay those judgments, the water bills. So we're going to pay all of that money until all that money on the table is down to zero. We want to balance at zero.
So the goal is, a good closing is when the balance goes to zero, all the money's out, everybody's paid, and all invoices are closed.
They have to go to zero.
Correct.
Sometimes we might have a hard time chasing down the uncle from the grandma in 1972 who died and owes $15,000. We might hold that in what's called escrow. So escrow means when we're holding something that's not ours. So we're going to hold 15 grand. We're going to find this guy and we're going to make sure he gets his money to clear up that blemish. Sometimes things like that could delay it, but for sure, zero. But the buyer doesn't care. The buyer goes, look, you cross that off. If it takes you a month to track this guy down, if he knocks on my door, I'm sending him right to Nightberry. You'll take care of it.
That's correct.
Yeah. So then you get down to zero. All the docs are recorded. Within the next 30 days in Wisconsin law, most states' law, all those creditors that we paid off have to send a release or a satisfaction to the courthouse saying, all these debts that this guy owed me, I'm paid now. Remove the lien from the real estate.
Sure.
And that takes 30 to 60 days. And then at some period of time after that, the title company will send you sort of your final title policy, which is just like the 5 or 6 pieces of paper that you paid for that says everything we told you we were going to do when you first got into this with the title company is done. Here's your policy. Keep it in with your closing docs. And and refer to it when you go to sell the thing.
Yeah. So when they get that document should be scanned, put into their files, their records. They should hold on to that because it'll save them premium going forward. But it also changes the search criteria. At the end of the day, maybe it helps with the search criteria from the 60-year search. It gives you guys a leg up to say that search has been done for us. Now we got to catch up on the chain of title.
Yeah. So in 2 years from now, if the guy goes to sell it, your buyer goes to sell it, I don't have to search another 60 years because I just did it. So I need to update it the last 2 years, which is why you don't pay when you have that policy from when you bought. You don't have to pay the whole 100% of the policy. There's a pretty big discount you get in Wisconsin.
So you get a discount if you have that policy.
Yeah, because the next buyer is going to say, I want a policy too. You don't have to pay the $2,000 again. You get a discount off of that because you just did it. We don't have to search 60 years again.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So, but again, if you lose it, a lot of people are panicking. Oh, I can't find my title policy. I closed at Nightberry. Guess what? We have it.
Yeah, we issued it.
We'll find it. If you forgot, let us know when when you enter that contract. Say, hey, Nightberry, you've got this. We'll go and find it. Now, if you can't remember, if you closed it, you mentioned First American Title earlier. Yeah. If you close at one of our competitors, you can still use us. You still get the discount. We'll get a copy of it from them. Or most title companies are friendly to each other, so we'll see the marking on the deed that 5 years ago, Literary Title did something, and we'll call those. Those guys are pretty cool. Yeah. And they'll email it over to us. So you don't have to always go back to the title company that you've used in the past. Stick with a title company that knows non-residential is pretty important. There's about 60 title companies in this Milwaukee market. I know most markets there's dozens of title companies. Not all of them can do non-residential. So you want to make sure they know what they're doing with non-residential. Residential is an easier transaction. Multifamily, commercial, investment real estate is a little trickier because you're dealing with LLCs and people all over the place and money transactions. Typically, you guys want to close it really fast. So,
real estate investor wants to get in, get out.
And a residential, you're going to write an offer to purchase Monday after an open house, and you might take 45 days to do a closing by the time they do the appraisal and the inspector and all that stuff. But you guys tend to want to close right away. So pick a company that's special, doesn't just specialize in residential is another advice for you.
Yeah, that's all great advice. Craig, I'd like to close with this last thought. I'm really appreciative for you joining.
One more thing.
Yes, please.
I get to interrupt you.
Yes.
One more thing.
Oh, yeah, interrupt.
1031 exchanges, that's huge right now. So, and I'll just briefly say, if you're an investor and you're not finished being an investor and you bought something for 50 grand and now you're selling it for 150 grand, if you're going to want to take that 100,000 in profit and go buy another piece of real estate, you do what's called a 1031 or a Starker exchange. Nightberry holds that 100 grand in profit. You go and find another piece of real estate to buy. We bring that to closing for you. You haven't touched it, and you deferred your capital gains until when you do cash out. Yeah. So if you're just going to roll investment to investment to investment, and you're not finished being an investor, talk to a CPA, an accountant or something about a 1031 exchange. Our company can do that. There's a lot of rules involved with that. But if you don't want to cash out, pay the capital gains, go buy another one, cash out, pay the capital. If you're doing that, you might want to talk to a professional on that.
Yeah, and that begs. It was a great interruption only because tax is huge, and the ability for you to delay and grow and expand your rental portfolio or your real estate portfolio by way of a like-kind exchange, 1031, Starker, whatever version of the terminology is huge. And there's a lot of great advisors out there to help with 1031s and lawyers, CPAs, and make sure you're working with a commercial agency that can execute a 1031 exchange for you. That's great. I'd like to close with just opportunities, right? The title chain, if savvy enough as a real estate investor, can help present you with the opportunities, right? I'm a real estate investor, and I'd like to know when a list pendants is filed, because that triggers something in my brain, right? And so what does a list pendants mean? And then what does that trigger, I guess, was the opportunity that we see a lot of real estate investors playing with probate actions in our court districts. So I guess my question to you really is, when a real estate investor is looking at title by way of notices, right, or actionable notices, there's a lot of real estate investors that are out there buying probates, they're buying estates, they're buying non-MLS off-market deals. They're dealing with people that have filed list pendants, or someone that's filed a list pendants, and then what's happening after that action. I guess my question to you really is, how does a real estate investor find opportunity inside of title? Okay.
Well, the first thing you said about list pendants, it just typically is a red flag to a buyer that there's pending litigation for whatever reason. There's something pending, and the outcome of that litigation is going to or could affect title. So if you say, oh, great, and you buy something, and 6 months, a year from now, that litigation ends, and part of that litigation is that the title goes to that bank in a foreclosure or the investor or whatever it is, you just lost your title. So when you see pending list pendants, that just means something's brewing. In the context of real estate, typically it's a mortgage foreclosure. Yeah,
sellers in foreclosure. So a guy sees a pending list of foreclosure action. We see a lot of investors that are going to knock on those doors and saying, hey, you got some problems? We know there's a problem here. When you go on PropStream, or you go on Zillow, or you go on any of these websites, when they're saying pre-foreclosure, they're basically, that's a trigger that a list pendants has been filed. That's as simple as that.
That's right.
And so the opportunity is there, right? What other opportunities are there, right? Like, where else can people pick up on real estate opportunities? I'm trying to give the investor a little bit of heads up to say, like, hey, these notices trigger something that might be a tidbit, and maybe there isn't anything that you could share with us today, but I wonder really what else is out there that gives opportunity to real estate investors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've got a source where you're finding list pendants, the first thing you would probably want to do is contact the creditor and say, what's up on this? I mean, if it's a mortgage foreclosure, the law firm handling the foreclosure, they're probably not going to answer the phone and call you right back, but maybe a day or two later, they'll call you and say, well, it's a mortgage foreclosure. We've got a judgment. We're set to go to sheriff's auction in 2 weeks. You can say, well, what's the bid? I mean, most of the time they'll tell you because the lender wants you to bid.
Yeah, the lender wants out. They don't want property.
So they'll be, you just can't email someone and get an answer in 10 seconds. But be patient, figure out who the creditor's law firm is, talk them through it, tell them what you're trying to do, be honest with them, and they'll give you they usually give you whatever information you want. You can also, when you see a list pendants, you might want to know what else is out there. So if you're going to knock on a door and you're going to enter a contract and give the guy some money and you're going to do all this work, and then 2 weeks later, hire me, and you're going to see a ton of other stuff, you're going to say, oh, I just wasted all this time and money.
For sure.
So you can call, any local title company will sell you, in Wisconsin, they're called a letter report. In other states, they're called an ownership and encumbrance report. Maybe it's $100, depends on the sophistication of the property, but it'll tell you, here's what's out there. So it's kind of like a pre-title search. For $100, here's who owns it, here's the debt they're in, here's what this list pendants is, here's the taxes, and so it's just the monetary things you have to deal with. And then look, if you pay $100, you get this thing and you go, whoops, that's $100 I lost.
Sure.
So, but it's worth it.
It's the best $100 you've invested at that point.
The best deal you'll ever do is the one you didn't do.
Right, that's for sure. What about, so Craig, let's talk about this. Here's my closing question to you. People that are buying at sheriff sale, which we finance sheriff sales, right? So we're one of few lenders around the country that'll finance a sheriff sale. But when we do that, we ask our borrowers to pull a letter report because it's important that they know who's foreclosing. Is it the first lien, the second lien? Are there other tax obligations outstanding, etc. Because we've seen people that bid on something, and what they're bidding on is a second mortgage subject to another $300,000 in front of them.
Do you know how many hearts I've had to break with real estate investors?
Oh, I thought you were going to say with your looks. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That have called and said, I just put $10,000 in an auction, and now I need to bring the balance of the property by next week. I just found out it was $1 million property. I got it for $100,000. I put $10,000 down, and now I need to bring the rest of it. And it turns out I only bought the second mortgage subject to. Now I have to. There's $1.2 million mortgage out there that I'm responsible for. I'm upside down already. How do I get my $10,000 back? I go, you can beg the court. Some judges, or you say, look, I don't know what I was doing. I misunderstood. Maybe they'll be lenient, maybe not in bigger counties.
Not here.
And say, all right, we'll unwind it, and the creditor can go do the sheriff's sale again. Most of the time, you're going to be out your money.
Yeah, we've yet to see that happen. But I've seen the broken heart.
Well, north of, in the rural markets, if you go in and you say, woe is me, I'm a new real estate investor. I didn't know. I'm so stupid. I should have done. Maybe they'll say, all right, fine. Here's your $10,000 back. Unwind it and send it to sale again next week. But if you do your homework.
No, if you do the homework, if you do the $100 homework and you find a property you want, you learn a lot from that.
Yeah, so I've had to tell people a lot of times that you've lost your down payments. Right?
I understand that. We've seen it. We've seen it. So I think that's very good information. Well, Craig Haskins, Chief Operating Officer of Nightberry Title, I can't thank you enough for being here with us. You've been a great resource for me since I started investing in real estate, which is now almost 20 plus years ago. I remember the day I met you, and that story we'll save for another day. But just want to thank you for your wisdom related to title and joining us today on The Hard Truths. My name is Scott Lurie. Joining us today from The Hard Truths is Craig Haskins with Nightberry Title. And thank you all for joining us. And Craig, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, guys.